What is up, guys? Welcome to Random Select Daily number 3. For today, I kind of want to talk a little bit about linearity in video games. So, I didn't realize that this was actually a bigger debate than I thought it was. Most of the people I talk to, they hate linear games. They call it's a derogative term. It's a term that no one, if they want to call it something bad, they'll call it linear. Well, okay, it's not just a term for bad, but if it's a game that is not as open world as Skyrim, and it's not good, they'll call it linear. And one of the most famous or at least notorious games known for this is Final Fantasy 13. Final Fantasy 13 is not the worst game out there. I don't think anyone will ever claim that. There will be some hardcore Final Fantasy fans that will claim that, but it's not the worst game out there. Very linear game. I'm not going to defend it on that. I think it's even too linear to a fault, and I love linear games, and I'll show a couple of games why I believe that and believe in linear games. But Final Fantasy 13 was a game I actually quite enjoyed. I only got to 2/3. I didn't quite get to the open world aspect of Final Fantasy 13, which I heard opens up like 2/3 into the game or 3/4 into the game or something crazy like that. But I did get through most of the linear parts and through the 8-hour tutorial and stuff like that, and I really personally enjoyed it. I didn't finish it, but I've never finished any Final Fantasy game. I could have played Final Fantasy 7, 6, 3, 4, whatever is considered the best nowadays, and I probably never would have finished it either. I've played the beginning of Final Fantasy 9 like 500 times, stuff like that. But basically, I guess not before, but to get back on track, Final Fantasy 13 is very well known for being a very linear game because the paths are literally all you can continue on. There's some branching paths, but they always loop back to the main path, and it's just it's always just a treasure chest. And that's definitely not a good thing to have in a linear game, but there's a lot of good examples out there that I feel kind of prove that linear is a good thing. Maybe not the best thing, I think that's why video games are so great, is because there's not one formula that makes a good video game. Skyrim is a great video game. It's not linear at all, but and these games that are coming up, I'll show you, are very good linear games. And so I have 4 examples here. I could have made up more, but I decided to get these 4. So first up, we have BioShock Infinite on the top left, and then Phoenix Wright on the top right. Nathan Drake, Uncharted, the Uncharted series on the bottom left, and then of course Portal on the bottom right. And so what I describe as linear is a game that makes you go from point to point to point to point without much distraction. And all 4 of these games are literally that. BioShock Infinite, the most distraction you got was the world, but in the end, that's kind of what it was. Like, that's what BioShock Infinite was it was this world that you were traveling in, and you see the racism in people and the highly religious undertones, or whatever. It's not even an undertone, it was overtone, I guess. But BioShock Infinite was, I would consider, a very linear game. And what are people calling it? A lot of people are calling it the best game ever, or their favorite game, or whatever. And why is that not called linear? Why aren't people going, "Oh, BioShock is a linear game"? And I think that's because people call games linear if they're only bad. Final Fantasy 13 is linear because it wasn't their favorite thing. Oh, Final Fantasy 13 is kind of a bad example, but it wasn't. I guess a good example would be like the Call of Duty series. Like, most people say it's a good action game, but people also call it's linear. And and since people don't like the Call of Duty series, they'll call it linear. But what do they call BioShock Infinite? They call it a great story. They call it great pacing. They call it good combat. And they skip on the linear thing. And I think all those things are kind of a product of developers being able to write a linear gameplay. And the reason I say this is because if it's linear, you have more control over your game. And if you have more control over your game, you can kind of get the details more often than not. Skyrim, I always hear, is such a great game, but not because it has the greatest story, not because it has the greatest combat, but because of its adventures you have. Like, I may be going to save the princess, and all of a sudden I just go wander into the world and I see a giant and dragon fighting. and people love that. Or you'll see a glitch where you touch a guy and the guy just launches to outer space or something like that. And that's a great thing to have. That's what's so cool about video games, is because you go from something like BioShock, which is such a refined game that it has great pacing, has great story, great uh, narrative, that has great voice acting and great combat and stuff like that. And you can't really do that quite as much with open world, because you have so much more to consider. With BioShock, like, they have some extra rooms, but it never really required much more than what was actually designed to be the main story. And Phoenix Wright, to me, was another game like that. Phoenix Wright, to me, has had the best characters, the best writing. Phoenix Wright is not quite as famous as these other three games, but it has such good narrative, and this game is literally a linear game. Like, there's no branching things. You get the illusion of some kind of branching stuff sometimes, because you can technically go to wherever you want to, but to continue the story, there's only one way. You literally go straight, and then you can look outside the windows, basically. Like, if you're going down a hallway, this game is a hallway with some windows that you can look out of every so often. Other than that, it's a very linear game, and I think anyone who has played the Phoenix Wright series will tell you that it has a great narrative, it has great writing, and you want to keep going. Like, this game is so linear, but it's also hours long, if you're not cheating at least, and if you're reading all the stuff. And it was basically a book, but it's so good at it. It's so good at its narrative and all this kind of stuff. Same with Uncharted and Portal, that it's not really considered called linear. It's just called good pacing, good story. And I think the best games that will have the best combat and the best narrative are going to be linear games. Why? Because they have more time to concentrate on it. And I'm so glad that there's this balance of open world where you can play. I love Saints Row 3, which is basically open world. Not a good story, but I had so much fun just running around, trying to juggle people with explosive magnums or whatever, or explosive deagles, or running around in a car trying to race people, trying to outrun cops or whatever. That's so fun. But when I want, a lot of people play video games for a good narrative, and I feel like linear games will get you that more often than not. And so yeah, I mean, that's just kind of what I want to talk about with linear games. I'm not gonna try to say one is better than the other. I think they work so well together, And there's also the games that are kind of in the middle, with like Mass Effect and most of the BioWare games are kind of right in the middle there. And I'm just glad that both exist. I hope that if you're one of those guys that love open world games, that you maybe try some more linear games and kind of open your eyes on what exactly a linear game can do, and what it allows for developers and stuff like that. Other than that, that's just kind of what I talk about. I personally love linear games because they generally do have the better combat. BioShock, to me, it was very linear. I didn't love the BioShock Infinite combat, but what it kind of was, since it's kind of like very scripted, the battles were more epic. They can build like all these they can build the skyhook stuff, and they can make 3 tiers, and they can give Elizabeth her power thingies, and I don't know how to describe it. Like, it's just, but it allows for much more dynamic gameplay, and I feel like linear stuff opens that more. And yeah, so that's all I had to say. I probably rambled on a little bit more than I wanted, but just try some linear games. I think if you kind of open your eyes to them, you'll kind of see that linear is good sometimes. Other than that, I'll see you guys later. Adios.